arms of mine. Headed for the Frisco Bay.
Say, I've got the heebies. I mean, the heebies talking about.
Otis Redding, the soul music maestro, was on top of the world, riding the wave of fame that kept getting bigger and bigger. Otis began his journey from the ground up, putting in the sweat and tears until he became known as the King of Soul. Many fans couldn't get enough of his mesmerizing voice.
Now I know she's waiting.
But just when everything seemed perfect, tragedy came knocking. It was like a dark cloud on his sunny days of success. The music world lost one of its brightest stars, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. Otis Redding's story was one of highs and lows, filled with success of stardom to the path of tragic fate. Let's dive in to explore the amazing journey of Otis Redding, from his musical career to his untimely demise. So, Otis Redding Jr.'s story began back on September 9, 1941, in Dawson, Georgia. When he was just a kid of 5, his family upped sticks and moved to Macon. It was there that he soaked up the sounds of famous singers like Sam Cooke and Little Richard. As a little tyke, Otis got his start singing in his church choir, and he picked up guitar and piano skills along the way. By the time he hit 10, he was already taking lessons to polish his drumming and singing. He even got into the high school band at Ballard Hudson High School, and on Sundays, he'd make a cool $6 singing gospel tunes on a local radio station. But life threw him a curveball when his dad got sick with tuberculosis when Otis was just 15. To help out, he had to drop out of school and take on part-time gigs like digging wells and other odd jobs. Eventually, he landed a spot in a band called the Upsetters, who used to jam with his idol, Little Richard, before he went solo. Then came Otis's big break in 1958, when he was just 17. He took part in a talent show called The Teenage Party, hosted by a DJ named Hamp Swain at the Roxy and Douglas theaters. A local guitar whiz named Johnny Jenkins was in the crowd that night. He noticed that the band backing Otis wasn't cutting it, so he jumped in himself to jam with Otis. And what did Otis choose to sing? Heebie-Jeebies by Little Richard, of course.
Say, I've got the heebies. I mean, the heebies talking about.
Otis really hit his stride when he joined that talent contest. He kept winning it week after week for a whopping 15 weeks straight, pocketing a cool $5 prize each time. And it was during one of these gigs that he met Zelma Atwood, who stole his heart. They were both just teenagers at the time. About a year later, they welcomed their first child, Dexter, into the world in the summer of 1960. Otis and Zelma tied the knot in August 1961, and they ended up having 3 kids together. But by 1960, Otis was feeling the itch for bigger things. He made the tough call to leave his newborn family behind and head out to Los Angeles, California, in search of better opportunities. That's where he laid down his first tracks and eventually scored a deal with Stax Records. And boy, did he make an impact. One of his earliest hits was These Arms of Mine, a soulful ballad that he penned himself. It quickly climbed the charts, hitting number 20 on the R&B charts in 1963. Known for his infectious energy in the studio, Otis churned out his third album, Otis Blue, in just a single day in 1965. As a songwriter, Otis, often teaming up with Steve Cropper, brought a fresh sound to rhythm and blues. It was sharp, straightforward, and packed a powerful resonated with listeners far and wide. Just when Otis's career was really taking off, there was this unexpected turn of events on December 10th, 1967. He was all set to rock the stage at the Factory nightclub in Madison, Wisconsin. Earlier that day, he called home, and his wife noticed something off in his voice. She even mentioned later that she thought he sounded down, but Otis, being the trooper he was, brushed it off, saying he was just tired. I mean, the guy and his band had been hustling. 3 shows in 2 nights at Leo's Casino, plus they'd been on some upbeat TV show in Cleveland the day before. He wanted to chat with all his kids, but only little Otis III was up. They had a quick exchange before Otis said his goodbyes to his wife. He even threw in a playful reminder for her to be sweet and good, skipping the usual, "I love you." It's one of those moments that makes you wonder if he would have said it if he knew what was coming next. Around 12:30 p.m. that afternoon, Otis and 5 of his bandmates, Jimmy King, Fayon Jones, Ronnie Caldwell, Ben Colley, Carl Cunningham, along with their valet, Matthew Kelly, hopped on Otis's brand new plane, a twin-engine Beechcraft H-18. The pilot, Richard Fraser, seemed experienced enough, with over 1,000 hours of flying under his belt, including a fair bit on Beechcraft planes. Now, here's where it gets eerie. One of the band members, James Alexander, ended up on a commercial flight instead because there wasn't enough room on Otis's plane. At the time, he probably felt like he got the short end of the stick, but little did he know, he dodged a bullet. You see, James Brown, the legendary musician, found out that Otis was flying the same type of plane he'd ditched because of safety concerns. He even warned Otis about it. Looking back, James Alexander remembered their last chat, thinking about how chilling it was in hindsight. He said, "I said that the plane is not big enough to be doing what you're doing. It can't carry all those people and all that equipment. You shouldn't be messing around with it like that." James continued, "That plane was an old plane with a bad battery and a lot of service problems, and it had no business flying in that kind of weather." The weather that day was lousy, with heavy rain and thick fog blanketing the area. People at the airport were giving Otis some serious advice, telling him, "The weather is too bad and you shouldn't go, you need to cancel this gig." But Otis replied, "Man, I've never missed a day in my life and I'm not going to start." Now, Otis, who never missed a beat when it came to performing, didn't want to let his fans down, no matter what. So, despite the warnings and the iffy weather, he decided to go ahead with the flight. His motto was something like, "Gotta make that dollar." Plus, the pilot reassured him that they'd be safe. So, there they were, a group of 8, taking off from Cleveland, Ohio, and heading towards Madison. As they got closer to their destination at Truax Field in Madison, everything seemed to be going smoothly. It was around 3:25 p.m. when the pilot radioed in for permission to land. But then, out of nowhere, tragedy struck. The aircraft began its descent, trying to navigate through the thick clouds as it approached the airport. They had to fly over Lake Monona before reaching their destination. Just as they were nearing the shore, something went horribly wrong. Nobody can say for sure what happened next, but suddenly, the engine sputtered and conked out. With the fog making it hard to see, the pilot had no choice but to rely solely on the plane's instruments for navigation. It was like flying blind, hoping those instruments were doing their job right. A witness on the lakeshore reported seeing the plane flying weirdly, with one wing lower than the other. Then it suddenly turned and crashed into the lake not too far from the shore. It was surprising that the plane didn't break apart when it hit the water. It stayed on top of the icy lake for a little while before slowly sinking. The witness reported, "I heard a twin-engine plane overhead in the fog. I noticed that it was having engine trouble as there seemed to be a lack of power in the motors. The aircraft then came out of the overcast and approached the water. The left wing was angled to the left and appeared to be dipping. The plane hit the water, and I heard a loud noise like an explosion or auto accident. There was no fire, and the plane rested on the surface for 3 to 5 minutes and then sank. Inside the plane, Ben Colley, who played the trumpet in the band, woke up when his bandmate, Fayon Jones, got scared and looked out the window. In just a moment, Ben unstrapped his seatbelt and ended up in the cold lake, holding onto a cushion to float. Unfortunately, Ben couldn't swim, so he wasn't able to help anyone else. Instead, he had to watch as his bandmates, Otis, guitarist Jimmy King, saxophonist Fayon Jones, organ player Ronnie Caldwell, drummer Carl Cunningham, and the band's valet, Matthew Kelly, struggled in the icy water. They screamed for help, but tragically they couldn't be saved, and they succumbed to the cold and drowning. Pilot Richard Fraser also lost his life in the accident. The police reported, while en route to Madison, Cawley fell asleep and was suddenly awakened, and experienced the sensation that the aircraft was in a spin and falling. He stated that things happened so fast, and that the plane was losing altitude at such a rapid rate, he found it difficult to breathe. He immediately unfastened his seatbelt and grabbed an object, possibly some kind of cushion, and the aircraft plunged into the lake. He assumes the aircraft broke apart, as he found himself free of the wreckage in the water and still clinging to whatever object he had grabbed. He heard Ronnie Caldwell, another of the Barkays, calling for help, and started towards Caldwell to aid him. However, Caldwell disappeared before he could make contact. He also heard Carl Cunningham, a barquet, calling for help, but stated Cunningham was too far away and he too disappeared. Within a few minutes, the police boat arrived and he was rescued. Understandably, the accident deeply affected Ben, leaving him with nightmares for the next 50 years. He shared with the Memphis Commercial Appeal that even after all that time, he still feels the rush of the lake's icy water, the chill of fear, and the helplessness and hurt that followed. He told the publication, "I didn't know it, but my head was swollen and bleeding, and I remember I had only one shoe. I saw Carl come out of the water. I saw Matt come up on the other side." The cause of the crash appeared to stem from a potential issue with the plane's battery system. According to Cawley, a mechanic at the Nashville airport had mentioned that the battery system wasn't operating at full power. The pilot, Richard Fraser, who was 26 at the time, had obtained his multi-engine land license just 10 months before the crash. Fraser was indeed at the controls of the plane, with Otis Redding seated beside him in the co-pilot's seat. As Ronnie cried out for help, tragically, one by one, the stars of the band couldn't hold on any longer and slipped into the icy depths. The rescue team arrived at the crash site in just 17 minutes, fast enough to pull Ben out of the water, but sadly, they couldn't reach the others in time. Even after investigation, the cause of the crash remained a mystery. FAA official Robert Kinn reported there was no indication of trouble from the plane. Contact was lost at 3:25 p.m. Meanwhile, fans had already started lining up at the concert venue when they heard about the plane crash. They went home that evening, holding on to hope that somehow, someway, Otis had made it through. That was his wife's hope, too. Around 5 p.m., she got a call from the Madison coroner. They described recovering a body, a tall, dark-skinned man wearing a black undershirt. They thought it might be Jimmy King, but his identity was still unconfirmed. Trying to stay calm and hold back the fear creeping in, she quickly responded, "That's not Otis." She pointed out that Otis never wore undershirts and was an excellent swimmer. He had to be out there somewhere, alive. They just hadn't found him yet. She demanded they keep searching, but the plane had gone down deep into the lake, resting at a 45-degree angle, its nose buried in the silt, missing a wing and an engine. It was torn apart, with no sign of the other passengers or the pilot, except for Ben Colley and one other. Divers faced tough conditions as they combed the waters for hours. When they resumed the search the next morning, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Otis was found still strapped into his seat.
Sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tides roll away.
Just 26 years old when he passed away, leaving behind his wife, Zelma, and their 3 children, Dexter, Carla, and Otis III. When Bernard Reese witnessed the crash, he immediately contacted the police. At 3:28 p.m., 4 Madison police officers were dispatched to the Lake Monona boathouse. Sergeant Ted Mell filed a report. Upon arrival at the scene, we took the boat out onto the lake and proceeded to the southeast corner of the lake where we located numerous debris. A man, Ben Colley, was found clinging to couch-type seat. This subject was taken aboard our boat. We continued the search, and another man, Richard Fraser, was found in the water. The subject was still in a single passenger-type seat, and his seatbelt was still fastened. He was taken aboard the boat, and I immediately began mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and closed heart massage. The other officers continued to search, and another subject, Jimmy King, a Bar K, was found still secured to a single passenger-type seat by his seatbelt. We were unable to locate anyone else at this time and took boat to the Monona boathouse. The 3 above persons were then conveyed to the hospital. As the Madison police officers returned to the boathouse, Officer John Pendleton from the Monona Village Police Department arrived at the crash site in a boat, accompanied by witnesses Bernard Reese and Christopher Dickert. According to Sergeant Mell's report, they located no other survivors. However, they did pick up a small, dark gray attaché case. The attached case found at the crash site became the subject of intense speculation. People wondered what it held. Some speculated it might contain. However, official reports made no mention of opium. Interestingly, any references to were notably absent from the official police report. They were crossed out with thick black lines. On December 14th, 4 payroll checks addressed to Otis Redding were discovered, amounting to a total of $1,106.25. However, no large amounts of cash were ever recovered, or at least there were no reports of such findings. Then, on December 20th, divers found the body of Ronnie Caldwell in the vicinity of the crash site. Along with his body, personal belongings belonging to the band were also recovered. Unfortunately, the body of Bar K member Phelan Jones remained missing. In January of 1968, Phil Walden and Twigs Linden released Dock of the Bay. The lyrics, combined with Redding's soulful voice, were truly haunting. Left my home in Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay. I have nothing to live for. Looks like nothing gonna come my way. So I'm just gonna sit on the dock of the bay, watch the tide roll away. Dock of the Bay, sung by Otis Redding, was #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart for several weeks running, and by April had sold 400,000 copies.
I left my home in Georgia.
Twigs Linden, who had accompanied Otis's wife to Madison, later ended up in prison after stabbing a man. He was eventually released, but in 1980, he tragically died in a skydiving accident when he failed to pull his ripcord. Friends believed he had a fear of growing old. As for Otis Redding, he never had to face the fear of growing old, as he passed away at the young age of 26 in the icy waters of Lake Monona. The Redding family has endured more heartbreak with the passing of Otis Redding III in April 2023 at the age of 59. His family confirmed that he lost his battle with cancer, describing it as a huge loss for both the family and the world. Following in his father's footsteps, Otis III had joined forces with his brother Dexter and cousin Mark Lockett to form the funk band, The Reddings. Together, they recorded 6 iconic albums over the years, leaving behind a lasting musical legacy. Otis's death came as a shock to many fans, especially considering his untimely demise at such a young age. It left a profound sense of sorrow and grief among his fans and family members. Back in Otis's hometown of Macon, Georgia, they honored him by naming a bridge after him. That's it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching.